The NIGMA Empire was like a giant monster that had been eating up planets for 3,000 years. They were so powerful that no one dared to fight them. Their massive ships could destroy entire worlds, and their soldiers were trained from birth to conquer and control. Every alien race in the galaxy either served them or feared them. When their scout ships first spotted Earth, it was just another day at the office for Fleet Commander Vexthan. He was sitting in his command chair, looking at the data on his screen. A small blue planet with one moon, primitive technology, and billions of these strange two-legged creatures called humans. Vexthan laughed and threw the report aside. This would be easier than taking candy from a baby. The NIGMA had a simple system. They would send a message to new worlds demanding surrender. If the aliens said yes, they became slaves. If they said no, the NIGMA would bomb their cities until they changed their minds. It had worked perfectly for thousands of years. But humans were different, though Vexthan didn't know it yet. When the first human ship arrived at the NIGMA capital planet, everyone was curious. The ship was small and looked fragile compared to the massive NIGMA warships floating nearby. It had no big weapons, no heavy armor, nothing that looked dangerous at all. Ambassador Minji Park walked down the ramp of her ship with 5 other humans behind her. She was a small woman with dark hair and calm eyes, wearing a simple blue uniform. The NIGMA guards towered over her. They were 8 feet tall with thick armor and energy weapons. But Minji didn't look scared at all. The NIGMA capital was a sight to see. Huge crystal towers stretched up into the purple sky, and flying vehicles moved between them like insects. Alien creatures from dozens of different worlds walked the streets, all of them bowing their heads when NIGMA soldiers passed by. This was the center of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Minji and her team were escorted to the Grand Council chamber, a massive room with walls made of pure diamond. Hundreds of NIGMA nobles sat in floating chairs, their 4 eyes all focused on the tiny human delegation below. The air hummed with translator devices, so everyone could understand each other. Councillor Grixmore was the most important NIGMA after the Emperor himself. He was ancient even by their standards, and had personally overseen the conquest of over 50 worlds. His skin was dark purple, and his 4 eyes could see in spectrums that humans couldn't even imagine. When he spoke, his voice boomed through the chamber like thunder. Minji stepped forward and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "Leaders of the NIGMA Empire, we come to you with a simple offer. Leave our world alone, and we will not interfere with yours. We have no interest in your territory or your subjects. We only want to live in peace on our own planet." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of laughter. First one NIGMA noble chuckled, then another, until the entire chamber was filled with harsh, mocking laughter. These humans thought they could negotiate as equals. It was the funniest thing they had heard in centuries. Grixmore's 4 eyes gleamed with amusement as he leaned forward in his floating chair. "Little creatures," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You seem to misunderstand your situation. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to inform you of your new reality. Your species has exactly 1 solar cycle, one of your Earth years, to prepare for integration into our empire." Another NIGMA noble, Vexkara, added with a cruel smile. "You should feel honored. Most primitive species don't even get a warning. We usually just arrive and take what we want." Minji listened to all of this without changing her expression. Her team stood quietly behind her, also showing no fear or anger. This confused some of the NIGMA nobles. Usually primitive aliens would be begging or crying by now. "I see," Minji said calmly. "So you have made your choice." She turned to leave, but Grixmore called out, "Wait, little human. You seem remarkably calm for someone whose world is about to be conquered. Don't you understand what we're telling you?" Minji stopped and looked back at him. For the first time, there was something different in her eyes. Not fear, but something the NIGMA couldn't quite identify. "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said. "We offered you peace. We tried to do this the easy way. When this is all over, and your empire is nothing but space dust, remember that you had a choice. Remember that we warned you." The chamber fell silent. The human delegation walked out without another word, leaving behind a room full of very confused and slightly worried NIGMA nobles. 1 year later, the NIGMA 7th Fleet appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system like a dark cloud blocking out The stars. 200 massive warships materialized from hyperspace, each one the size of a small city. Admiral Vexithon stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, watching Earth grow larger on his view screen. This little blue marble would be his easiest victory yet. The NIGMA fleet was truly terrifying to behold. Their ships were black as night with red energy, coursing through veins along their hulls. Each dreadnought carried enough firepower to glass an entire planet, and their shields could withstand the explosion of a star. These were the ships that had conquered 1,000 worlds, and they had never lost a single battle. Vexthon expected the humans to send desperate messages begging for mercy within minutes. Instead, his communications officer turned to him with a confused expression. "Sir, we're receiving a single transmission from Earth." "Put it through," Vexthon said, expecting to hear sobbing and pleas for forgiveness. Instead, a calm, human voice filled the bridge. "NIGMA Fleet, this is Captain Jinho Lee of the Earth Defense Force. You have entered our solar system without permission. Turn around and leave now, or we will be forced to defend ourselves." The entire NIGMA bridge crew burst into laughter. Defend themselves with what? Their primitive chemical rockets and nuclear weapons? Vexthon wiped tears from his 4 eyes. "Tell this Captain Lee that he has 1 hour to surrender unconditionally, or we will begin orbital bombardment." Jinho's response came back immediately. "We tried to warn you. Don't say we didn't give you a chance." What happened next would be talked about in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. Instead of a proper space fleet rising to meet them, the NIGMA encountered something they had never seen before in 3,000 years of conquest. The first wave of human defenders wasn't military ships at all. They were mining vessels, cargo, haulers, passenger liners, and even luxury yachts. But these civilian ships had been modified in ways that made no sense to NIGMA tactical computers. A cruise ship designed to carry tourists now bristled with jury-rigged missile launchers. An asteroid mining ship had nuclear reactors strapped to its hull like bombs. Captain Jinho Lee commanded this strange fleet from a converted freighter called the Soul Express. His ship used to carry consumer goods between Earth and Mars, but now it was loaded with experimental weapons that human engineers had thrown together in just 12 months. The NIGMA expected the humans to form neat battle lines and exchange fire like civilized warriors. Instead, the human ships scattered in all directions, using the asteroids in the belt as cover. When NIGMA dreadnoughts moved to engage them, human ships would dart out from behind space rocks, fire everything they had, then disappear again. But the real shock came when the first human ship was about to be destroyed. Instead of trying to escape, the damaged mining vessel turned directly toward a NIGMA cruiser and accelerated to ramming speed. The human captain's final transmission was heard across all frequencies. "For Earth!" The explosion when the mining ship hit the NIGMA cruiser was spectacular. The humans had overloaded their fusion reactor, turning their entire ship into a massive bomb. The NIGMA cruiser, designed to withstand conventional weapons, was torn apart by the blast. Vexthon stared in horror at his tactical display. No civilized species would sacrifice their ships and crews like that. It went against every rule of proper warfare. You were supposed to surrender when defeat was certain, not throw away lives in meaningless gestures. But the humans weren't finished. Captain Jinho had studied every piece of information Earth's spies had gathered about NIGMA tactics over the past year. He knew their ships were powerful but slow, designed for overwhelming firepower rather than maneuverability. So he used their own size against them. Human ships began using unconventional tactics that the NIGMA computers couldn't predict. They would hide inside asteroid fields, then detonate nuclear charges to create clouds of radioactive debris that interfered with NIGMA sensors. They turned ice comets into guided missiles by strapping engines to them. They even used their own destroyed ships as weapons, programming them to explode when NIGMA vessels came close. The strangest part was how the humans communicated during battle. Instead of military efficiency, their radio chatter was full of jokes, insults directed at the NIGMA, and references to something called movies that made no sense to alien ears. One human pilot was heard saying, "Remember the Alamo," just before ramming his fighter into a NIGMA weapons platform. After 6 hours of fighting, Vexthan looked at his casualty reports with growing disbelief. The humans had lost over half their ships, but they had taken down 12 NIGMA vessels with them. 12. That was more losses than the 7th Fleet usually suffered in an entire campaign. By the end of the first month, the NIGMA controlled Earth's orbital space, but at a cost that shocked the Empire. They had lost 60 ships and thousands of experienced crew members. The humans kept fighting even when their defeat was mathematically certain, using tactics so unpredictable that NIGMA battle, computers couldn't counter them. Admiral Vexthan sent his report back to NIGMA High Command with shaking hands. "These humans," he wrote, "do not fight like any species we have encountered. They show no regard for their own lives and use tactics that border on insanity. Recommend immediate reinforcements and revised conquest protocols." The Empire had won the first battle, but they were beginning to realize they had awakened something terrible. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a secret laboratory that didn't exist on any official maps, Dr. Soo-Young Kim was having the best day of her life. On the metal table in front of her sat something that should have been impossible, a NIGMA energy core, still humming with alien power. Most people would have been terrified to be in the same room as this thing, but Soo-Young was practically bouncing with excitement. The energy core looked like a crystal sphere wrapped in flowing metal ribbons, glowing with soft blue light. It was beautiful and deadly at the same time, containing enough power to run a small city for a year. The NIGMA had spent centuries perfecting this technology, and they expected it to remain a mystery to primitive humans for decades. They were wrong. Soo-Young had always been different from other kids. While her classmates were playing games, she was taking apart radios and computers just to see how they worked. By age 12, she had built her own quantum computer in her garage. Now, at 35, she was one of Earth's leading experts in theoretical physics, and she was looking at NIGMA technology like a child looks at the ultimate puzzle. "Jae-won, come look at this," she called to her assistant, Dr. Jae-won Park. "The power flow patterns don't follow any physics we know, but there's definitely a logic to it." Jae-won hurried over, carrying a tablet full of scanning data. "The energy readings are off the charts, Soo-Young. This thing is pulling power from somewhere else entirely. It's like they found a way to tap directly into the fabric of space itself." That's when Soo-Young smiled the smile that her colleagues had learned to fear. It was the same smile she'd had right before she invented faster-than-light communications and right before she figured out how to make artificial gravity. It was the smile that meant she was about to break some fundamental law of physics. "What if we're thinking about this all wrong?" she said, walking around the energy core like a cat stalking prey. "The NIGMA see this as a finished product, something perfect that can't be improved. But what if it's just the starting point?" 3 weeks later, Soo-Young's team had done something that NIGMA scientists said was impossible. They had completely reverse-engineered the energy core and figured out how it worked. But more than that, they had found ways to make it better. The breakthrough came when engineer Hyun-woo Nam suggested something crazy. "What if we combine this with our fusion technology?" he asked during one of their late-night brainstorming sessions. "The NIGMA energy core provides clean power, but our fusion reactors provide raw strength. What happens if we merge them?" Most engineers would have said it couldn't be done. The technologies were too different, too incompatible. But Hyun-woo had grown up fixing broken cars with spare parts from completely different vehicles. To him, everything was just another engineering problem waiting to be solved. The first test of their hybrid system nearly destroyed the entire laboratory. The power output was so much higher than expected that it overloaded every measuring device they had. But instead of being discouraged, Hyun-woo just grinned and said, "Now we're getting somewhere." Within days, human ships began appearing in space that made no sense to NIGMA tactical analysts. A human fighter that used to struggle to reach half the speed of light was now moving at velocities that should have been impossible. The pilot, Commander Minji Choi, was pulling maneuvers that should have turned her into paste from the acceleration forces, but the humans had solved that problem too. Dr. Soo-Young's team had combined NIGMA gravity manipulation technology with human medical knowledge to create inertial dampeners that protected pilots from extreme forces. Minji could now perform turns that would make a NIGMA pilot black out, all while laughing over the radio. The NIGMA Empire's chief scientist, Kral Von, received reports that made him question his understanding of physics. Human vessels were combining technologies in ways that violated every engineering principle he knew, yet somehow they worked perfectly. A human destroyer had NIGMA shields, human weapons, and what appeared to be a propulsion system that borrowed elements from both civilizations, plus something entirely new. "This is impossible," Kral Von muttered, studying the data for the 100th time. "Their fusion reactors should overload the NIGMA shield matrices. The power frequencies are completely incompatible." But the humans had figured out how to make incompatible technologies work together by thinking outside the box. Where the NIGMA saw problems, humans saw opportunities. Where the NIGMA saw limitations, humans saw challenges to overcome. Engineer Hyunwoo Nam was already working on his next breakthrough. He had noticed that NIGMA weapons were incredibly efficient, but lacked the raw destructive power of human nuclear weapons. So he started experimenting with ways to combine them. The result was a weapon that had the precision of NIGMA energy beams, with the explosive force of human nuclear warheads. The first test of this hybrid weapon vaporized an asteroid the size of Manhattan. The explosion was so bright it could be seen from Earth with the naked eye. Hyunwoo watched the destruction through his telescope and made a note in his journal. Note to self: dial down the power settings for next test. Meanwhile, Dr. Soo-young was working on something even more ambitious. She had been studying NIGMA communication technology and realized it worked on quantum principles that humans barely understood. But instead of trying to copy it exactly, she was combining it with human internet technology to create something entirely new. The result was a communication system that could send messages instantly across the galaxy, but also carried computer, viruses, propaganda broadcasts, and even entertainment programs. Soon, NIGMA military communications were being interrupted by human music, movie clips, and what appeared to be cooking shows. The psychological effect on NIGMA forces was devastating. They were used to facing enemies who tried to copy their technology and fight on their terms. But humans were doing something completely different. They were taking NIGMA technology and making it better, faster, and more dangerous than the original designers ever imagined. Admiral Vexthan received increasingly frantic reports from his fleet commanders. Human ships were appearing with capabilities that shouldn't exist. They were faster than NIGMA interceptors, tougher than NIGMA cruisers, and more heavily armed than NIGMA dreadnoughts. And somehow, they had built hundreds of these impossible vessels in just a few months. The Empire was beginning to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. They hadn't just attacked a primitive species, they had given the galaxy's most dangerous innovators access to advanced technology and a very good reason to use it against them. Commander Taehyun Choi had been a delivery driver before the war started. He used to pilot cargo ships between Earth's colonies, making boring runs with supplies and equipment. But now he was commanding something the galaxy had never seen before, a ghost fleet that could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and disappear like smoke. His ships didn't look like traditional warships at all. They were sleek and black, designed to be invisible to NIGMA sensors. Human engineers had combined stolen NIGMA cloaking technology with their own stealth systems, creating vessels that were practically ghosts in space. The NIGMA called them shadow ships because you never saw them coming. On a quiet Tuesday morning, the NIGMA colony of Zephyr Prime was going about its normal business. This was a peaceful world, far from any fighting, where NIGMA families lived comfortable lives. The orbital defense platforms lazily scanned empty space, their crews bored and relaxed. Nothing interesting ever happened at Zephyr Prime. That changed in exactly 37 seconds. Taehyun's ghost fleet materialized out of nowhere, appearing so close to the defense platforms that the NIGMA sensors didn't have time to react. The human ships moved with deadly precision, each one targeting a specific platform with weapons. That fired in complete silence. There were no dramatic explosions or bright flashes, just clean, efficient destruction. Within minutes, every single orbital defense platform around Zephyr Prime was floating debris. The NIGMA colony below watched in horror as their protection simply vanished. Then, across every communication frequency in the system, Taehyun's voice rang out clear and cold. "You wanted war. Now you have it." Before the NIGMA could even send a distress signal, the human ships were gone, vanishing back into the darkness of space as suddenly as they had appeared. By the time NIGMA reinforcements arrived 3 hours later, there was nothing left but wreckage and very frightened colonists. This wasn't the way wars were supposed to work. For 3,000 years, the NIGMA had fought their enemies in massive fleet battles where the strongest side won. Armies would meet in space, exchange fire until one side surrendered, and that would be that. It was civilized, predictable, and honorable. But humans didn't care about honor or tradition. They cared about winning. Captain Hyejin Yu had been a news reporter before the war, traveling across Earth to cover stories that most people ignored. Now she was using those same skills to wage a different kind of battle, one fought with information instead of weapons. Her ship, the Truth Seeker, looked like a harmless communications vessel, but it carried the most dangerous weapon in human arsenal, the ability to broadcast to every screen and speaker in NIGMA space. Hyejin had been collecting recordings of every human victory, every NIGMA defeat, every moment when the supposedly invincible empire showed weakness. She edited these recordings into short, devastating messages that spread across NIGMA networks like wildfire. One of her most effective broadcasts showed NIGMA Admiral Vexthan running away from a human attack, his flagship damaged and smoking. Over the footage, Hyejin's voice calmly explained, "This is your mighty 7th Fleet, the pride of the NIGMA Empire, fleeing from a handful of human ships. Ask yourself, if they can't protect themselves, how can they protect you?" The psychological effect was devastating. NIGMA citizens who had never questioned their empire's strength suddenly began having doubts. If the humans could destroy orbital platforms without warning and make admirals run like scared children, what else were they capable of? On the Outer Rim colonies, something unprecedented began happening. Worlds that had served the NIGMA Empire for centuries started declaring independence. The governor of Kepler Station sent a simple message to NIGMA High Command, "We're done. Find someone else to boss around." Admiral Vexthan was going insane trying to fight an enemy that refused to follow the rules. Every time he moved his fleet to defend one location, the humans would attack somewhere completely different. They seemed to know exactly where NIGMA forces were at all times, while remaining completely invisible themselves. The humans had learned something important about the NIGMA Empire during their months of fighting. It was big, but it was also fragile. Like a huge machine with thousands of moving parts, all you had to do was break the right pieces, and the whole thing would fall apart. So that's exactly what they did. Commander Taehyun's ghost fleets began targeting communication relays, the networks, that allowed different parts of the empire to talk to each other. Without communications, NIGMA commanders couldn't coordinate their defenses or call for help. Entire sectors of space went dark, cut off from Imperial command. Human strike teams, led by soldiers like Lieutenant Woojin Kim, began hitting supply convoys. These weren't glorious battles. They were quick surgical strikes that left NIGMA fleets without fuel, food, or ammunition. Woojin's team would appear out of hyperspace, destroy a supply ship, and disappear before anyone knew what happened. The most terrifying part was how precise the human attacks were. They never targeted hospitals or schools. They never attacked civilian ships carrying families. But every military target, every government building, every piece of infrastructure that kept the empire running, all of it was fair game. Captain Hyejin continued her information warfare, broadcasting messages that spread fear throughout NIGMA space. Her most effective tactic was playing recordings of NIGMA officials calling their own citizens expendable and acceptable losses. When people heard their own leaders talking about them like they were disposable, loyalty to the empire crumbled overnight. The breaking point came when humans attacked the NIGMA military academy on Rigel 7. This wasn't just any target. It was where the empire trained its future officers, a symbol of NIGMA military might that had stood for over 1,000 years. Commander Taehyun's ghost fleet appeared during the academy's graduation ceremony, when hundreds of young NIGMA officers were receiving their commissions. Instead of attacking, The human ships just hovered there in orbit, making it clear they could destroy the Academy whenever they wanted. Then Captain Hiagin's broadcast reached every cadet simultaneously. Young officers of the NIGMA Empire, look up at the sky. See those human ships? They could kill you all right now, but they're choosing not to. Ask yourself, why are you fighting for leaders who see you as expendable when your enemies show you more mercy than your own empire? Half the graduating class walked away that day, abandoning their military careers rather than fight in a war their own leaders didn't seem to understand. Admiral Vexton stared at his tactical displays with growing despair. The humans weren't just winning battles. They were systematically destroying everything that made the NIGMA Empire function. And the worst part was, he had no idea how to stop them. The hunters had become the hunted, and the NIGMA Empire was learning what it felt like to be afraid. The morning sky above the NIGMA homeworld had always been a beautiful shade of purple, dotted with 3 small moons that danced across the horizon. For over 5,000 years, no enemy fleet had ever appeared in that sky. The NIGMA capital was considered the safest place in the galaxy, protected by defense systems that could destroy entire star systems. That changed on a quiet Thursday morning when Admiral Minseo Kang arrived with the human fleet. The ships that materialized in orbit were nothing like what the NIGMA expected. These weren't the crude, cobbled-together vessels that humans had used at the beginning of the war. These were works of art, sleek, elegant warships that seemed to bend light around them as they moved. Each ship was unique, combining human creativity with perfected alien technology in ways that made NIGMA scientists weep with envy. Admiral Minseo stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Soul Avenger, watching the NIGMA homeworld grow larger on her screens. She had been a simple mathematics teacher before the war, helping kids understand algebra and geometry in a small school in Busan. Now, she commanded the most powerful fleet in galactic history, and she was about to end a war that should have lasted decades. The NIGMA planetary defense grid activated the moment human ships appeared. Massive energy cannons that could crack moons swiveled toward the human fleet, charging up with enough power to vaporize anything in space. Force fields that had never been breached flickered to life around the planet. Emergency sirens wailed across the capital city as millions of NIGMA citizens looked up at the sky in terror. But Minseo's fleet didn't attack. Instead, something far more frightening happened. The human ships simply waited. They hung in space. Like patient predators, their weapon systems powered down, making no threatening moves at all. To the NIGMA watching from below, this was more terrifying than any attack could have been. The humans were so confident in their superiority that they didn't even bother to raise their shields. Then, across every communication channel on the planet, a familiar voice began to speak. It was Ambassador Minji Park, the same woman who had stood in the NIGMA council chambers 7 months ago and offered peace. Her voice was calm and gentle, like a teacher explaining something to a confused student. "People of the NIGMA Empire," she said, her words reaching every screen, every radio, every communication device on the planet simultaneously. "7 months ago, I stood in your council chambers and made you an offer. I told your leaders to leave our world alone, and we would leave you alone. I warned them that we tried to do this the easy way." The NIGMA Emperor himself, Zathul the Eternal, sat in his crystal throne watching the human fleet through his palace windows. He was ancient even by NIGMA standards, having ruled the empire for over 800 years. He had seen the rise and fall of countless alien civilizations, but he had never seen anything like this. Minji's voice continued, broadcasting to every corner of NIGMA space. "Your leaders chose war. They thought we were weak because we offered peace. They laughed when we warned them. Well, we're not laughing now." What happened next became known as the greatest demonstration of technological superiority in galactic history. Without firing a single shot, the human fleet began to systematically shut down every defense system on the NIGMA homeworld. The massive planetary cannons that had been charging to fire simply stopped working. Their power systems failed in perfect sequence, one after another, like lights going out in a building. The impenetrable force fields that protected the planet flickered and died. Even the communication systems that the NIGMA military used to coordinate their defense began playing human music instead of military orders. Dr. Soo-young Kim, now serving as the fleet's chief technology officer, had spent months preparing for this moment. Her team had learned to hack NIGMA systems so completely that they could take control of any alien technology remotely. The NIGMA weren't just being defeated, they were being completely outclassed by an enemy who understood their own technology better than they did. Emperor Zarthul watched in growing horror as his empire's most advanced defenses were turned off like light switches. His military commanders were running around the palace in panic, trying to figure out how the humans were doing this. But there was nothing to figure out. The humans had simply become so advanced that NIGMA technology was like stone tools compared to quantum computers. The final demonstration came when Admiral Minseo decided to show the NIGMA exactly what they were dealing with. One of her ships, the Incheon Rising, began to transform before their eyes. The vessel unfolded like a mechanical flower, revealing weapons systems that didn't follow any known principles of physics. Energy began to gather around the ship in patterns that made space itself seem to ripple. "That's enough," whispered Emperor Zarthul, staring at the impossible sight. "Signal the fleet. We surrender." But Minji wasn't finished with her broadcast. "In 7 months," she continued, "humanity has learned everything your empire spent 3,000 years developing. We've improved it, perfected it, and made it our own. We could destroy your homeworld right now, but we won't. Do you know why?" The question hung in the air as billions of NIGMA citizens waited for the answer. "Because unlike your leaders, we actually meant it when we said we wanted peace. We never wanted to conquer anyone. We just wanted to be left alone. But you forced us to become something we never wanted to be, the most dangerous species in the galaxy." The formal surrender ceremony took place in the same crystal chamber where Minji had first been laughed at 7 months earlier. Emperor Zarthul signed the unconditional surrender documents with shaking hands, while Councillor Griximor wept openly at the sight of his mighty empire brought to its knees. The terms were surprisingly gentle. Humans would oversee the dismantling of the NIGMA, military, but civilians would be left alone. Conquered worlds would be freed to govern themselves. The only requirement was that the NIGMA Empire would cease to exist as a military power. As the ceremony concluded, Admiral Minseo looked out at the gathered NIGMA officials and spoke the words that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. "Let this be a lesson to anyone else who thinks humanity can be easily conquered. We offered you peace and you chose war. Next time, maybe you'll choose more wisely." Within hours, the news spread to every corner of known space. The NIGMA Empire, which had ruled for 3 millennia, had been completely defeated by a species that most aliens had never heard of just 7 months earlier. Alien civilizations across the galaxy began updating their first contact protocols with a new universal rule: never, under any circumstances, attack the humans first. The age of human dominance had begun, not through conquest, but through the simple demonstration that when humans said they wanted to be left alone, it was in everyone's best interest to listen. Humanity had become the galaxy's new superpower, and they had done it in exactly the way the NIGMA should have expected, by being completely unpredictable